The windshield wipers fought against the Texas storm like desperate arms clawing at darkness. Caroline Foster gripped the steering wheel tighter as lightning split the sky above Highway 287, illuminating the endless stretch of ranch land that would be her new home. The rain hammered her sedan's roof with metallic fury, each drop echoing the uncertainty pounding in her chest. She'd left Denver 3 days ago with everything she owned crammed into the back seat: her MBA diploma, 2 suitcases, and a determination to prove herself worthy of managing Hale Farms' ambitious agricultural modernization project. At 29, this was her shot at redemption after the consulting firm in Colorado had let her go for being too idealistic. Her phone buzzed against the cup holder. Another missed call from her mother. Caroline could almost hear the worried voice. "Honey, are you sure about moving to the middle of nowhere? What if it doesn't work out?" She'd stopped answering because she didn't have good answers. The headlights caught a figure stumbling along the roadside. A man in a soaked denim jacket and worn boots, carrying what looked like a canvas backpack. Caroline's first instinct was to drive past. Her second was shame at the thought. She pulled over, gravel crunching under her tires, rolling down the passenger window. She called out over the storm, "You need help." The man approached cautiously. Rain dripped from the brim of his baseball cap, obscuring his face except for tired eyes that held no expectation of kindness. "My truck broke down about 2 miles back," he said, voice rough but polite. "I'm trying to get to town, but this storm—" "Get in." Caroline unlocked the doors. He hesitated. "You sure? I'm pretty wet. It's just a car." But as he slid into the passenger seat, bringing the scent of rain-soaked earth and honest work, Caroline felt something shift. Up close, she could see calloused hands, weathered skin, and an unexpected gentleness in his movements. "I'm Ethan," he said, extending his hand. "Ethan Hale, Caroline Foster." His grip was firm, warm despite the cold rain. "Where in town do you need to go?" "Actually," Ethan glanced out at the storm. "I hate to ask, but is there anywhere closer I could wait this out? My phone's dead, and I don't want to keep you driving in this weather." Caroline thought of the small cottage she'd rented on the edge of the Hale Farms property. There was an old equipment shed nearby with electricity and heat. "I might know a place." 20 minutes later, she was unlocking the shed while Ethan waited respectfully by her car. The space smelled of motor oil and hay, but it was dry and warm. An old couch sat against one wall, probably left by previous tenants. "This is perfect," Ethan said, genuine gratitude in his voice. "Thank you, really." Caroline found herself lingering as he settled onto the couch. Pulling off his wet jacket to reveal a simple flannel shirt, there was something about his presence, calm, undemanding, that made her small cottage across the yard feel less lonely. "I could make coffee," she offered. "You've done more than enough," but his eyes suggested he wouldn't mind the company. She brought him a thermos and an old blanket from her car as she handed them over. Their fingers brushed, and she noticed how he looked at her, not like someone cataloging her usefulness, but like someone seeing her clearly. "What brings you out here in weather like this?" Caroline asked, settling into the single chair across from him. Ethan sipped the coffee, steam rising between them. "Sometimes you have to see things for yourself, you know. Reports and spreadsheets only tell you so much about what's really happening on the ground." Something in his tone made Caroline study his face more carefully. There was intelligence behind the tired eyes, and his hands, though calloused, moved with the precision of someone accustomed to making important decisions. "You work in agriculture?" she asked. "Something like that." Ethan's smile was enigmatic. "What about you? You don't look like you're from around here." "Starting a new job tomorrow, actually. Farm management." Caroline surprised herself by adding, "Honestly, I'm terrified I'll mess it up." "Why would you think that?" The question was simple, but his attention felt complete. Caroline found herself explaining her last job, the politics that had undermined her innovations. The way her ideas had been dismissed as naive, Ethan listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking gentle questions that showed he understood the complexities of implementing change in traditional industries. Thunder crashed overhead, and they both glanced toward the window. The storm showed no signs of letting up. "I should let you rest," Caroline said, standing reluctantly. "Caroline." The way he said her name made her pause at the door. "Whatever job you're starting tomorrow, they're lucky to have you." Walking back to her cottage through the rain, Caroline felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the possibility that she might belong somewhere. She fell asleep to the sound of wind in the oak trees, unaware that everything she thought she knew about her fresh start was about to change. The morning sun painted Hale Farms in golden strokes that made Caroline's breath catch. Rolling pastures stretched toward distant hills, dotted with cattle and bordered by white fences that seemed to go on forever. The main office building, a converted 19th century farmhouse, stood majestically among century-old oak trees. Caroline checked her reflection in her car mirror one last time. Navy blazer, practical flats, hair pulled back in what she hoped looked like confident competence rather than nervous control. Through the rear window, she could see the equipment shed where she'd left Ethan. Should she check on him? Thank him again? Something about their conversation had stayed with her through the night. The office reception area buzzed with Monday morning energy. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes smiled from behind an antique desk, covered with family photos and coffee-stained paperwork. "You must be Caroline. I'm Becca Martinez, office manager and general keeper of sanity around here." Her Texas drawl was warm as fresh cornbread. "How are you settling in, honey? That cottage treating you okay?" "It's perfect, thank you." Caroline appreciated the genuine welcome after months of polite professional distance in Denver. "Good. Now, let me introduce you to the team before you meet with—" Becca's words were cut off as the main office door opened. Caroline turned and felt the world tilt sideways. Ethan Hale stood in the doorway. Transformed, gone were the wet denim and worn boots, replaced by crisp khakis and a button-down shirt that emphasized the quiet authority she'd glimpsed the night before. His hair, no longer hidden under a soggy cap, was dark with silver threads at the temples. But those eyes, tired, kind, intelligent, were exactly the same. "Caroline," he said her name like he'd been thinking about it. "I hope you slept well," around them. The office had gone quiet. Caroline was aware of curious glances from the staff, of Becca's raised eyebrows, of her own heart hammering against her ribs. "You're—" she began, then couldn't finish the sentence. "Your new boss, apparently." Ethan's smile held a mix of amusement and apology. "I should have mentioned that last night." Becca's eyes darted between them. "You two have met. Ms. Foster rescued me from the storm yesterday evening," Ethan explained. "I was evaluating some property issues when my truck broke down." A woman emerged from the back office, tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in a way that made Caroline suddenly conscious of her department store blazer. Everything about her screamed expensive confidence. "Miranda Blake, operations supervisor," she said, extending a manicured hand. Her grip was firm, her smile sharp. "So you're the efficiency expert from Colorado." Something in her tone made Caroline's spine straighten. "Project manager, actually. I'm looking forward to working with the team." "Of course." Miranda's gaze flicked to Ethan. "Should I give her the full tour, or would you prefer to handle the orientation personally?" The question carried an undercurrent. Caroline couldn't quite decode. Ethan seemed to sense it too. "Why don't you show Caroline the facilities? I need to review some reports before our staff meeting." He turned to Caroline. "We'll talk more this afternoon." As Miranda led her through the building, Caroline tried to process what had just happened. The man she'd rescued, humble, grateful, seemingly down on his luck, owned this entire operation. More than that, he was her boss. The complexity of the situation made her stomach flutter with something between excitement and dread. "So," Miranda said as they walked past offices filled with busy staff, "how exactly do you know Mr. Hale?" "I don't, really. I just—" Caroline opted for honesty. "I gave him a ride last night during the storm." "How fortunate for you." Miranda's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Ethan values loyalty above all else. Personal connections can be very advantageous in a place like this. They paused outside a conference room where an older Hispanic man with graying temples was reviewing blueprints. Miranda knocked on the glass. "Samuel, come meet our new project manager." Samuel Ortega's handshake was warm, his smile genuine. "Welcome to Hale Farms. I've been looking forward to your arrival. We could use some fresh perspectives around here." "Sam's our head engineer," Miranda explained. "He's been here longer than anyone except Becca. 23 years, Samuel said with pride. "Watch this place grow from a small family operation to what it is today." As they continued the tour, Caroline found herself cataloging impressions. The state-of-the-art equipment warehouse, the solar panels glinting on barn rooftops, the sophisticated irrigation systems. But she also noticed things Miranda didn't mention: outdated computer systems, inefficient storage layouts, gaps in the technological integration that was supposedly her mandate to fix. Back in the main office, she glimpsed Ethan through his open door, phone pressed to his ear, expression serious. When he looked up and caught her watching, something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the strange intimacy of their first meeting, now complicated by professional reality. "Quite a setup, isn't it?" Miranda observed, following her gaze. "Ethan's invested heavily in modernization. Of course, change can be challenging in an operation this size. We've had consultants before who promised dramatic improvements but couldn't deliver practical results." The message was clear. "Don't get too comfortable." Carolyn excused herself to set up her temporary office. Mind racing. The easy connection she'd felt with Ethan the night before now felt dangerous, complicated. She'd come here to prove herself professionally, not to navigate the treacherous waters of workplace romance. But as she arranged her files and tried to focus on productivity reports, she couldn't shake the memory of his voice in the darkness. "They're lucky to have you." Now she had to prove he was right. Caroline's first week at Hale Farms felt like trying to solve a puzzle while riding a bucking horse. Every time she thought she had a handle on one challenge, 3 more appeared. The storage warehouse was a maze of misplaced inventory. The computer systems crashed whenever she tried to run comprehensive reports, and the irrigation schedules seemed to follow logic known only to the phases of the moon. "Becca," she called from her temporary desk Tuesday morning, "where did you say the fertilizer delivery records are kept? Which ones, honey? Current season, last season, or the ones Miguel keeps in that notebook he won't let anyone else touch?" Becca's voice held fond exasperation. Before Caroline could answer, the office door chimed, and Luis Ramirez entered with dirt under his fingernails and concern creasing his weathered face. The farm's head caretaker was somewhere in his 40s, with the kind of quiet competence that came from decades of making things work. "Becca, we got a problem with the South Pasture irrigation. 3rd time this month the system's running dry when it should be watering." Miranda appeared from her office as if summoned by the scent of crisis. "Again, Luis, I thought you fixed that last week." "I did fix what I could see, but something's not right with the scheduling system, feels like." Luis glanced at Caroline apologetically. "Like maybe someone's been changing settings without telling anyone." Caroline looked up from her laptop. "Mind if I take a look? I've been trying to map the irrigation workflows anyway." Miranda's smile was ice-thin. "I'm sure Luis can handle it. We don't want to overwhelm you with technical issues on your first week." "Actually," Ethan's voice came from the hallway, "that's exactly why Caroline's here, to identify these kinds of system inefficiencies." He'd been scarce since Monday's introduction, appearing only for brief status meetings where their interactions remained strictly professional. But Caroline caught him watching her sometimes, during her presentation on inventory optimization, when she was explaining her plans to Samuel, once when she was laughing at something Becca had said. Each time, she felt that same flutter of connection from the storm-darkened shed. "Of course," Miranda said smoothly. "I just want to make sure she has realistic expectations about our challenges." Luis led Caroline and Ethan to the control room, a small building that housed the farm's technological nerve center. Banks of monitors displayed data from across the property: soil moisture, weather conditions, equipment status. It should have been impressive, but Caroline immediately spotted the problems. "Your sensors are sending data, but they're not integrated with the scheduling system," she observed, pointing to inconsistencies on the screens. "So the computers are watering based on time schedules instead of actual soil conditions. Can you fix it?" Luis asked hopefully. Caroline studied the setup, mind already racing through solutions. "I think so. It'll take some programming work, but we could set up automatic adjustments based on real-time data." "How long?" Ethan asked. "Give me a few days to map the current system, then maybe a week to implement the changes." Luis grinned. "Miguel's gonna love this. He's been saying for years that the computer doesn't know as much about watering as his plants do." After Luis left, Caroline found herself alone with Ethan in the control room. The space felt smaller with just the two of them, the hum of equipment creating an intimate backdrop. "Is this what you were doing Sunday night?" she asked, checking on system problems. Ethan leaned against the control panel, and she caught a hint of his cologne, something clean and understated. "Among other things, I like to see problems firsthand rather than just reading reports, even in thunderstorms, especially then. Weather puts stress on every system we have. If something's going to fail, that's when you'll notice it." He paused, studying her face. "I should apologize for not being completely honest that night." Caroline felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You didn't lie, you just didn't mention you owned the place. Would it have changed anything if you'd known?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Caroline thought about her answer carefully. I hope not, but it makes things more complicated now. Complicated how? She met his gaze directly. I came here to prove myself professionally. Last thing I need is people thinking I'm getting special treatment because I gave the boss a ride. Ethan's expression grew serious. Is that what you think? I think Miranda's already wondering about it. Miranda wonders about a lot of things. Something in his tone suggested history there. Caroline, I want to be clear about something. Whatever happened between us that night, the conversation, the connection, it was real, but it doesn't change my expectations for your work here. I hired you because your ideas are exactly what this operation needs. His words should have been reassuring, but they stirred something complicated in Caroline's chest. Professional respect mixed with personal attraction in a way that felt both thrilling and dangerous. Thank you, she said quietly. The control room door opened, and Samuel appeared with a clipboard. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got a situation with the East Field drainage that needs immediate attention. As they returned to the main building, Caroline noticed Miguel Santos tending to the flower beds around the office entrance. The elderly groundskeeper looked up with a shy smile. Miss Caroline, Becca told me you might help with the watering computers. I'm going to try, Miguel. Luis says you know these plants better than anyone. Miguel's weathered face lit up. 52 years I work this land. I know when she's thirsty, when she's tired, when she needs medicine. He gestured toward the control building. Computers are smart, but they don't have eyes to see. No, maybe we can teach them to use your eyes, Caroline suggested, as she walked back to the office. She felt optimistic for the first time since arriving. She had real problems to solve, smart people to work with, and a boss who valued her ideas. The personal complications could be managed. She didn't notice Miranda watching from her office window, phone pressed to her ear, or catch the words that would soon complicate everything. Yes, I understand the timeline, but we may have a problem with the new manager. She's getting too close to too many people too quickly. By the end of her second week, Caroline had found her rhythm at Hale Farms. The irrigation system was responding beautifully to her modifications. Luis had stopped looking surprised when the computers actually helped him, and even Miguel had grudgingly admitted that the machine eyes were learning to see. Thursday evening found her in the equipment barn with Ethan, reviewing the monthly maintenance schedules by the warm glow of industrial lighting. The air smelled of hay and machine oil, comfortable and honest. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly in their pastures. Your efficiency improvements are already showing up in our water usage reports, Ethan said, pointing to the tablet displaying consumption data. We're down 12% from last month. Caroline tried to focus on the numbers, but she kept getting distracted by his proximity. He'd rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong forearms, and when he leaned closer to show her something on the screen, she caught that clean scent she was beginning to associate with him. The real test will be during the dry season, she managed, but the soil sensors are giving us much better data now. Caroline, the way he said her name made her look up. I want you to know how much I appreciate what you've accomplished here. Not just the technical work, the way you've connected with everyone. Their eyes met and held. The barn felt suddenly smaller, more intimate. Caroline's pulse quickened as Ethan reached out, his fingers briefly touching hers where they rested on the tablet. The moment shattered as the barn door slid open with a rusty screech. Oh, Miranda stood silhouetted in the doorway, briefcase in hand and surprise written across her features. I'm sorry. I was looking for the quarterly expense reports. Becca said you might have them. Ethan stepped back smoothly, but Caroline felt the heat in her cheeks. They're in my office. I can get them for you. No rush, Miranda said, though her gaze moved between them with sharp interest. I'll pick them up tomorrow. After Miranda left, the comfortable atmosphere had evaporated. Ethan gathered his papers with suddenly businesslike movements. I should let you get back to your work, he said, though his eyes suggested he'd rather stay. Friday brought the monthly staff meeting, and Caroline felt ready to present her first comprehensive report. The conference room was packed. Department heads, senior staff, and several people she recognized as major investors or board members. The irrigation improvements are just the beginning, Caroline explained, clicking through slides that showed her plans for integrated farm management. If we connect all our systems, weather monitoring, soil analysis, equipment maintenance, inventory tracking, we can optimize everything from feed schedules to harvest timing. Samuel nodded approvingly. The cost savings alone would pay for the system upgrades within 2 seasons. What about implementation challenges? Asked one of the investors, a stern man in an expensive suit. We've seen a lot of promises from consultants that didn't pan out. Caroline had anticipated this. That's why I'm proposing a phased rollout. We prove each component works before moving to the next. Small wins building to major transformation. She was hitting her stride, confidence building as she outlined her vision. This was what she'd come here to do. Transform good intentions into practical results. Then Miranda raised her hand. These are impressive plans, Caroline, but I'm concerned about the financial projections. According to the quarterly reports, we're already over budget on technology upgrades. Caroline blinked. Over budget, the irrigation system came in under estimate, and we haven't purchased any major equipment yet. Miranda's expression was sympathetic but firm. I'm afraid there are some discrepancies in the expense tracking. Perhaps we should discuss this privately after the meeting. The room went quiet. Caroline felt all eyes on her, felt her carefully built confidence cracking. She glanced at Ethan, whose expression had gone carefully neutral. Of course, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. We'll figure out where the confusion is. But as the meeting dispersed, Caroline caught whispered conversations, concerned glances. The seed of doubt had been planted, and she could already feel it growing. In her office afterward, Caroline pulled up every financial record she could access. The numbers didn't make sense. Expenses attributed to her projects that she'd never authorized. Cost overruns that didn't match her documentation. Knock, knock. Samuel appeared in her doorway, concern creasing his features. How you holding up? I'm confused, Caroline admitted. These numbers don't match my records. Samuel closed the door behind him and lowered his voice. Caroline, I've been here a long time. I've seen a lot of changes, a lot of politics. You want some advice? She nodded. Be careful. Not everyone here is happy about new ideas, especially ones that might threaten existing power structures. He glanced toward Miranda's office. Just document everything. Keep copies of all your communications. After Samuel left, Caroline stared at her computer screen, unease growing in her stomach. She thought about her conversation with Ethan in the barn. The way Miranda had appeared so conveniently, she thought about the financial discrepancies that made no sense. For the first time since arriving at Hale Farms, she wondered if she'd walked into something much more complicated than modernizing farm operations. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Dinner tomorrow. We need to talk about the budget issues. Caroline stared at the message, trying to read between the lines. Was he asking as her boss who wanted to sort out financial problems? Or as the man who'd almost touched her hand in the warm glow of the equipment barn? She typed back. Yes. Where? My place. 7 p.m. I'll cook. As she drove home through the Texas twilight, Caroline couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change again, and not necessarily for the better. Caroline stood before her closet Saturday evening, paralyzed by the impossibility of choosing appropriate attire for dinner with her boss, who was also the man she'd rescued in a thunderstorm, and who might or might not be interested in her as more than an employee. The casual sundress felt too presumptuous, the business outfit too cold. She settled on dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that Miguel had complimented earlier that week, saying it matched the color of morning skies. As she drove toward Ethan's house, located on a hill overlooking the main farm property, she practiced conversations in her head. All of them ended badly. Ethan's home surprised her. Not the grand mansion she'd expected, but a restored farmhouse with wide porches and warm light spilling from tall windows. He answered the door in jeans and a button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking more like the man from the storm than the executive from the conference room. You found it okay? He asked, leading her through a living room decorated with comfortable furniture and local artwork. Your directions were perfect. Caroline accepted a glass of wine, grateful for something to do with her hands. This place is beautiful. The kitchen smelled like garlic and herbs. Something simmered on the stove while homemade bread cooled on the counter. Through the window she could see the farm spread out below them, lights twinkling in the growing darkness. I hope you like pasta, Ethan said, stirring sauce with practiced ease. It's about the only thing I make that's actually edible. They fell into easy conversation as he finished cooking, about the farm, about her adjustments to Texas life, about everything except the budget discrepancies that had supposedly prompted this dinner. The domestic intimacy felt natural, dangerous. Over dinner, he finally broached the subject. I reviewed those financial reports Miranda mentioned. There are definitely some inconsistencies. Caroline's appetite disappeared. I've gone through my records 3 times. Nothing I've authorized should have caused those overruns. I believe you. His directness surprised her. The question is how expenses got attributed to your projects without your knowledge. You think someone's deliberately creating problems? Ethan chose his words carefully. I think there are people who benefit from the status quo. Your efficiency improvements threaten certain arrangements. Before Caroline could ask what he meant, her phone rang. The caller ID showed her mother's number. The third attempt today. Caroline declined the call, but the interruption reminded her of the complications simmering beneath the surface of this evening. I should answer, she said reluctantly. She'll keep calling until I do. Her mother's voice was tight with worry. Caroline, honey, I've been trying to reach you all day. Are you okay? You sound different in your emails. I'm fine, Mom. Just adjusting to the new job. Are you sure because I was talking to Mrs. Henderson, and she said her nephew looked up that farm online, and there were some concerning articles about management changes and financial problems. Caroline felt Ethan watching her, probably hearing every word of her mother's voice through the phone. Mom, I can't really talk right now. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? After hanging up, awkward silence settled between them. Everything all right? Ethan asked gently. Just mother's intuition working overtime? Caroline tried to smile. She thinks I'm making another impulsive career mistake. Are you? The question was serious, and she considered it seriously. I don't know yet. I came here because I believed in the vision of modernizing agricultural operations. But if someone's actively sabotaging my work… Caroline, Ethan reached across the table, covering her hand with his. I want you to know that whatever's happening with the budget issues, it doesn't change my confidence in you. His touch was warm. Certain, Caroline felt herself leaning into the connection, the possibility of trust. What if I can't prove I'm not responsible for the problems? Then we'll figure it out together. The we hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Caroline was acutely aware of his thumb moving softly across her knuckles, of the wine loosening her defenses, of the fact that they were alone in his house with the Texas night stretched out around them. She pulled her hand back gently. This is complicated. It doesn't have to be. Yes, it does. She stood, needing space to think clearly. I can't afford to have people think I'm getting special treatment. Not when someone's already questioning my professional integrity. Ethan stood too, moving closer. What people think doesn't change what's happening between us. What is happening between us? The question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended. Ethan's expression softened, and for a moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back. I don't know, he said honestly, but I'd like to find out. Caroline drove home through the darkness with her head spinning. The evening had answered none of her questions and raised a dozen new ones. She was attracted to Ethan. That much was undeniable, but she was also increasingly certain that someone was undermining her work, and any personal involvement with her boss would only complicate her ability to handle the professional crisis brewing around her. As she pulled into her cottage driveway, she noticed movement in the equipment shed where she'd first sheltered Ethan. A figure with a flashlight was moving around inside, checking something. Caroline sat in her car, watching. The figure emerged. Miranda, carrying what looked like a laptop bag. She locked the shed carefully and walked toward her own car. Parked in the shadows behind the main building, Caroline waited until Miranda drove away before getting out of her car. The shed was locked, and she had no reason to go inside anyway, but the timing felt strange. Saturday night. After business hours, checking equipment that wasn't part of Miranda's usual responsibilities. Inside her cottage, Caroline pulled out her laptop and began documenting everything she could remember about the budget discrepancies, the timing of Miranda's questions, the convenient appearance of problems that made her look incompetent. She was either becoming paranoid, or she was being systematically set up for failure. Either way, she needed to protect herself. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching Caroline's mood as she packed her office belongings into cardboard boxes. The emergency board meeting had been swift and brutal, financial irregularities requiring immediate investigation, temporary suspension of the project manager pending audit review, regrets about the difficult but necessary decision. Ethan hadn't looked at her during the proceedings. I'm so sorry, honey, Becca whispered as she helped Caroline clear out her desk. This doesn't feel right. None of us understand what happened. Caroline folded her diplomas into tissue paper, hands steady through sheer force of will. Sometimes things just don't work out. But Samuel wasn't accepting diplomatic explanations. He appeared in the doorway, face dark with anger. This is bullshit, Caroline. Everybody knows you're getting railroaded. Sam, Caroline warned quietly, glancing toward Miranda's office where important conversations were happening behind closed doors. "No, I'm not staying quiet about this," Samuel's voice carried intentionally. 23 years I've worked here, and I know sabotage when I see it." The office went quiet. Through the glass partition, Caroline could see Ethan pause in his conversation with the board members. Miranda appeared at her office door, expression carefully concerned. "Sam, I understand you're upset," Miranda said smoothly. "We all are, but Caroline understands this is just temporary while we sort out the financial irregularities." "What irregularities?" Samuel demanded. "I've reviewed every expense report, every purchase order. The only irregularity I see is how costs keep getting attributed to projects Caroline never authorized." Luis Ramirez materialized beside Samuel, dirt still on his boots from morning chores. "Miguel wants to know if Miss Caroline is coming back. He's been asking all weekend." Caroline's throat tightened. "Tell Miguel I'll miss working with him." "This isn't right," Luis said quietly. "First time in years the irrigation system works properly. And now? That's enough." Ethan's voice cut through the murmurs. He stood in his office doorway, expression unreadable. "Everyone back to work, please." Caroline met his eyes for a brief moment, searching for some sign of the man who'd cooked her dinner 3 days ago, who'd said they'd figure things out together, but his face revealed nothing. The rest of the morning passed in tense silence. Caroline finished packing, while the staff went through the motions of normal work. She could feel sympathy and confusion radiating from Becca's desk, determination from Samuel as he continued reviewing financial records, and something that felt like victory from Miranda's office. As Caroline carried her final box to her car, Miguel intercepted her by the flower beds. "Miss Caroline," he said urgently, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "I need to tell you something." "What is it, Miguel?" The elderly groundskeeper pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Saturday night, I come back to check on the roses. Sometimes they need water when it's been hot. I see Miss Miranda in the computer building very late." Caroline's pulse quickened. What was she doing? "I don't know, but she drops this by her car." He handed Caroline the paper, a printed email confirmation for software purchased with funds allocated to the irrigation improvement project. Software Caroline had never ordered. "Miguel, this is important. Can you remember exactly what time you saw her?" "Maybe 10 o'clock. Little after." Miguel's weathered face was troubled. "She sees me watching and waves. Like everything is normal, but why's she there so late on Saturday?" Caroline folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her purse. "Miguel, don't mention this to anyone else. Okay? Not yet." Driving away from Hale Farms felt like leaving a piece of herself behind. In 3 weeks, she'd begun to imagine a future here. Professional success, personal connection, belonging somewhere. Now she was unemployed again, reputation questioned, starting over in a place where she knew almost no one. Her cottage felt smaller than before, silent except for the tick of the wall clock and the distant sound of farm operations continuing without her. Caroline sat at her kitchen table with Miguel's evidence and her laptop, trying to piece together what had happened. The software purchase was just one piece. Over the next few hours, using screenshots she'd saved and expense reports she'd copied, she began to see the pattern. Purchases made in her name without her authorization. Budget overruns created by systematically inflating costs on legitimate expenses. A careful campaign to make her look incompetent and financially irresponsible. Her phone rang. Her mother again. This time Caroline answered. "Hi, Mom." "Oh, sweetheart, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" The concern in her mother's voice broke something loose in Caroline's chest. "I think I got fired today." "What? Oh, honey, what happened?" As Caroline explained the situation, she found herself crying. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears of frustration and disappointment. Her mother listened without judgment, offering practical sympathy and fierce maternal loyalty. "So what are you going to do?" her mother asked finally. "I don't know. Look for another job, I guess. Maybe you were right about this being a mistake. Now you listen to me." Caroline Elizabeth Foster, her mother's voice turned stern. "I raised you to be a fighter. If someone's trying to destroy your reputation, you don't run away. You prove them wrong." After hanging up, Caroline felt marginally better. She had evidence. She had allies. Samuel, Luis, Miguel, Becca. She had the truth. What she didn't have was access to the farm's computer systems, her office, or the man whose dinner invitation had felt like the beginning of something important. But as the Texas sunset painted her cottage walls gold, Caroline made a decision. She wouldn't just find another job and move on. She would clear her name and expose whoever had orchestrated her downfall. Even if it meant taking on the entire Hale Farms operation, even if it meant confronting the uncomfortable possibility that Ethan had been part of it from the beginning, Samuel Ortega had built his reputation on 23 years of methodical problem-solving, and the Caroline Foster situation felt like a problem with missing pieces. Wednesday morning found him in the archive room, pulling 5 years of financial records and spreading them across his drafting table like a mechanical engineer dissecting a failed component. "You're gonna give yourself a heart attack," Becca warned, appearing with coffee and the concerned expression she'd worn since Monday's debacle. "Samuel, honey, sometimes these things just happen." "No." Samuel adjusted his reading glasses and pointed to a spreadsheet. "These things don't just happen, Becca. Look at this. Every questionable expense ties back to Miranda's approval codes, but they're all attributed to Caroline's projects." Luis appeared in the doorway, still wearing his work gloves. "You find something." "Maybe." Samuel showed him the pattern he'd discovered. "Someone's been moving money around for months, creating budget problems wherever Caroline was making improvements." Luis studied the documents with the same careful attention he gave to sick cattle. "This explains why the irrigation budget was always short. We kept having to delay equipment purchases. And remember the drainage project last fall," Samuel continued. "Same pattern. Costs spiraling. Delays. Then the whole thing getting shelved." Becca sank into a chair. "You're saying this has been going on since before Caroline even arrived?" "I'm saying someone's been planning this for a while." Across the farm, Miguel Santos was tending to his evening rose inspection when he noticed the same pattern that had troubled him Saturday night: lights in the control building after hours. This time, he positioned himself behind the tool shed where he could observe without being seen. Miranda emerged from the building carrying a laptop bag and a small equipment case, but instead of heading to her car, she walked to the back of the property where a black sedan was waiting. Miguel watched her hand the equipment case to someone in the driver's seat before the car pulled away. 20 minutes later, Miranda returned to the control building, stayed for another few minutes, then left for the evening. Miguel's limited English made him reluctant to report complex observations. But this felt important. He found Luis the next morning during feeding time. "Luis, I need tell you something importante." Luis listened carefully as Miguel described what he'd witnessed, asking questions in Spanish when the details got complicated. By the end of the conversation, Luis's expression had hardened. "Miguel, you're sure about this? The car, the case, everything?" "Sí, very sure. Something no está bien." Meanwhile, in her cottage, Caroline was conducting her own investigation, using the software purchase receipt Miguel had found. She'd traced similar transactions through online vendor accounts. Each purchase had been made with legitimate Hale Farms authorization codes, but none matched her project specifications. Someone had been buying expensive analytics software, security monitoring programs, and data extraction tools, all charged to her budget but delivered to addresses she'd never authorized. Thursday afternoon, Ethan called. "Caroline, I was hoping we could talk." His voice triggered a complicated mix of anger and longing. "I don't think that's a good idea. Please, just hear me out." Against her better judgment, she agreed to meet him at a diner in town, neutral territory where neither of them had to worry about farm politics or interrupted conversations. He looked tired when she arrived, shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. They ordered coffee and sat in awkward silence until Caroline couldn't stand it anymore. "So what did you want to talk about?" "I want to apologize," Ethan said simply, "for how the board meeting went, for not defending you more strongly, for letting this happen." Caroline studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity. "Did you know about the financial manipulation? I suspected something was wrong, but I didn't have proof, and when the board saw the expense reports," he ran a hand through his hair, "I should have trusted my instincts about you instead of the paperwork. Your instincts. That night in the storm, when you stopped to help a stranger, that told me everything I needed to know about your character. I should have remembered that when the numbers didn't add up." Caroline felt some of her anger softening, but wariness remained. "So, what happens now?" "Now I figure out who's been sabotaging your work and why. What if the board doesn't want you digging into it?" Ethan's expression hardened. "Then the board and I are going to have a problem." That evening, Samuel made an excuse to work late, waiting until the office building was empty before accessing the central computer system. His 23 years at the farm had earned him administrator privileges that most staff didn't know he possessed. What he found in the server logs made his blood run cold. Someone had been systematically copying financial data, project files, and personnel records for months. The digital footprints led to an IP address registered to a consulting firm in Dallas, a firm Samuel recognized from previous attempts to acquire struggling agricultural operations. But the access was coming from inside Hale Farms, using Miranda's login credentials. Samuel printed everything he could before the system automatically logged him out. As he gathered the evidence, he heard a car door slam in the parking lot. Through the window, he saw Miranda's BMW pulling up to the building, moving quickly. Samuel shut down the computer and grabbed his papers. He was halfway to the back exit when he heard the front door open. "Hello?" Miranda's voice echoed through the empty building. "Is someone here?" Samuel froze, trapped between the copy machine and the wall. He could hear Miranda's heels clicking across the floor. Moving toward the server room, his phone buzzed with a text message. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet building. The footsteps stopped. "Samuel, is that you?" He had two choices: hide and hope she'd leave, or confront her with what he'd discovered. Samuel Ortega had never been a man to hide from trouble. "It's me, Miranda." He stepped into the hallway, papers tucked securely under his arm. Working late again. Her smile was bright, but her eyes were calculating. "Just checking on some project updates. What brings you back so late?" "Equipment maintenance schedules." The lie came easily. "You know how it is. Always something that needs attention." They studied each other in the fluorescent light, both aware that something significant was happening beneath the surface of polite conversation. "Well," Miranda said finally, "don't work too hard. Big day tomorrow." Samuel waited until her car disappeared before exhaling. Whatever Miranda was planning, tomorrow was important. He needed to warn Caroline and Ethan before it was too late. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Caroline was feeding coffee to her cottage's temperamental coffee maker when her phone rang. "Samuel," voice tight with urgency. "Caroline, you need to get to the farm now. Bring any evidence you've collected." "What's happening?" "I'll explain when you get here. Meet me in the equipment barn, not the main office." 20 minutes later, Caroline found Samuel, Luis, and surprisingly, Becca, huddled around a makeshift table covered with computer printouts and financial documents. The barn smelled of hay and motor oil, but the atmosphere was charged with determination. "Show her," Luis said grimly. Samuel spread the server logs across the table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Someone's been selling our operational data to Wellington Consulting. They specialize in acquiring agricultural operations that are struggling financially." Caroline studied the documents, pieces clicking into place. "They create the financial struggles first." "Exactly. Make the operation look unstable, then swoop in with a lowball acquisition offer." Samuel pointed to a timeline he'd constructed. The pattern started 18 months ago, right after Wellington lost a bid to acquire the Morrison Ranch up north. Becca's voice was tight with anger. "Miranda's been feeding them information. Schedules, financial data, even personnel files. There's more," Lewis added. He pulled out a small digital camera, scrolling through photos. "Miguel saw her passing equipment to someone in a car Wednesday night. I've been watching since then. She's copying data to external drives every few days." Caroline felt sick. All those budget overruns, the mysterious equipment purchases, designed to make you look incompetent while destabilizing our finances. Samuel's engineering mind had laid it out like a blueprint. "You were never supposed to succeed here. You were supposed to fail spectacularly and provide cover for the real sabotage." The barn door slid open, and Ethan appeared with several men in suits. Board members Caroline recognized from the meeting that had ended her employment. "Samuel called me at 6 this morning," Ethan explained. "I've spent the last 3 hours explaining to the board why we're all here instead of in the conference room." One of the board members, a silver-haired man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "Ms. Foster, we owe you an apology and an explanation." For the next hour, Samuel presented his evidence while Luis showed photographs, and Caroline shared the financial irregularities she'd documented. The board members asked sharp questions, cross-referenced documents, and gradually built a picture of systematic corporate espionage. "Where's Miranda now?" the lead board member asked finally. "In her office, preparing for the 10 a.m. staff meeting," Becca said. "She thinks she's presenting the quarterly efficiency report." Ethan checked his watch. "Which gives us 30 minutes to decide how to handle this." "We confront her publicly," Samuel said. "In front of the entire staff. People need to see justice being done." "That could be messy," one of the board members warned. "Sometimes messy is honest," Caroline said quietly. The staff has been watching me get blamed for problems I didn't create. They deserve to see the truth. The staff meeting began normally enough. Miranda stood at the front of the conference room with her polished presentation, clicking through slides that painted a picture of operational challenges and necessary cost-cutting measures. Unfortunately, the experimental efficiency programs have created more problems than solutions, she explained to the assembled staff. We'll need to scale back technology integration and focus on proven traditional methods. Caroline sat in the back row, officially still suspended, but invited by Ethan to observe. She watched faces around the room, Miguel nodding politely despite not understanding most of the presentation, Luis frowning at charts that didn't match his field experience, Becca taking notes with obvious skepticism. Which brings us to staffing adjustments, Miranda continued. Given the budget constraints created by recent inefficiencies, we'll need to reduce headcount by approximately 15%. A murmur went through the room. These were people with families, mortgages, lives built around steady employment. Excuse me, Ethan stood from his position near the door. Before we discuss staffing changes, I think the room should see some additional information. Miranda's smile faltered slightly. Of course, what kind of information? Samuel moved to the projection system with his laptop. Financial data that explains the real source of our budget problems. What followed was devastating. Server logs showing unauthorized data access, photographs of clandestine meetings, financial records proving systematic expense manipulation. The evidence built methodically, each piece supporting the others. The room grew deadly quiet as the full scope of the sabotage became clear. Miranda's face went pale, then flushed red. There must be some mistake. These records could be fabricated. The FBI's forensic accounting team will determine that, one of the board members said quietly. They're already en route. The word FBI hit the room like lightning. Miranda's composure finally cracked. You don't understand. Wellington offered me a position. Executive Vice President of Operations. This place was going to be sold eventually anyway. I was just accelerating the timeline by destroying people's livelihoods, Luis said, his voice heavy with disgust. By stealing proprietary information, Samuel added. By blaming an innocent person for your crimes, Becca finished. Ethan stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built his life around ethical business practices. Miranda Blake, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the property, and your access to all company systems has been revoked. As Miranda was led from the room, the staff sat in stunned silence. Finally, Miguel raised his weathered hand. Miss Caroline, come back now. Ethan looked at Caroline, his expression mixing relief, regret, and something deeper. That's up to Ms. Foster. I hope she'll consider returning as our Director of Operations, with a significant promotion and the authority to implement the changes this farm really needs. Caroline stood slowly, aware that everyone in the room was watching her, waiting for her response. 3 weeks ago, she'd arrived here hoping for a chance to prove herself. Now she had something better, a team of people who'd fought for the truth and a purpose that went beyond professional advancement. Miguel, she said, smiling at the elderly groundskeeper. I think those computer eyes are going to learn a lot more about seeing. The room erupted in applause. Not polite corporate appreciation, but genuine celebration from people who'd witnessed justice being done. As the meeting dispersed, Ethan caught Caroline's arm gently. Can we talk? Privately. She nodded, following him outside to where the afternoon sun painted the farm buildings gold. They walked toward the equipment barn where she'd sheltered him during the storm that seemed like a lifetime ago. I'm sorry, he said simply, for doubting you, for not protecting you, for letting any of this happen. You didn't know. I should have trusted what I felt about you from the beginning. Caroline turned to face him, studying the face she'd first seen in lamplight and rain. What did you feel? That helping you was the smartest thing I could do. That you were exactly what this place needed. He paused. That I was in trouble. Trouble. The good kind. The kind that changes everything. The space between them seemed charged with possibility. But Caroline had learned something about herself over the past week. She was stronger than she'd known. More resilient. Worthy of respect, both professional and personal. Ethan, I want to be clear about something. If we do this, the job, us, whatever this is, it has to be as equals. No special treatment. No walking on eggshells because we have feelings for each other. Is that what we have? Feelings for each other. Instead of answering with words, Caroline stepped closer and kissed him. It was soft, tentative at first, then deeper as his arms came around her. It tasted like coffee and possibility, like storms weathered and new beginnings. When they broke apart, she smiled. I guess we'll find out. 3 weeks later, Caroline's new office overlooked the fields where autumn was painting the landscape in amber and gold. Her title, Director of Agricultural Innovation, came with resources she'd only dreamed of, and the trust of a staff that had proven their loyalty under fire. But the real satisfaction came from small victories. Irrigation systems that responded to soil conditions rather than arbitrary schedules, inventory tracking that prevented waste, and equipment maintenance that anticipated problems instead of reacting to breakdowns. The State Agriculture Department wants to use our integrated management system as a model program, Samuel reported during the Monday morning staff meeting. His promotion to Chief Technology Officer had surprised no one except Samuel himself. They're offering funding for expansion to 5 other farms. Miguel's sensor network is getting attention too, Luis added with pride. The quiet groundskeeper had become an unofficial consultant on sustainable growing practices, his decades of experience finally valued, alongside the digital systems that supported it. University Extension Office wants to document his methods. Caroline looked around the conference room, at faces that had become familiar and dear. Becca, now operations coordinator, managed schedules with the efficiency of a general and the warmth of everyone's favorite aunt. Luis had stepped into an expanded role overseeing field operations, bringing innovation to traditional practices. Even the board members, initially skeptical of change, now championed Hale Farms as a success story. But the most significant change was personal. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked as they walked through the equipment barn after the meeting, their footsteps echoing in the space where their relationship had first complicated and then deepened. "How different everything feels from 6 weeks ago," Caroline admitted. "That night you came walking through the storm. I thought I was just helping a stranded motorist. Best breakdown I ever had." They'd been careful about their relationship, maintaining professionalism during business hours and building something real in the quiet spaces between work and sleep. Dinner conversations that lasted until midnight. Sunday mornings sharing coffee on her cottage porch while planning improvements that excited them both. The gradual intimacy of 2 people learning each other's rhythms and dreams. "Caroline," Ethan stopped walking, and something in his tone made her turn to face him fully. "I've been thinking about the future." "What kind of future?" "The kind where this becomes permanent. Not just the job. Us." Her heart did something complicated in her chest. "Ethan, I know it's fast. I know workplace relationships are complicated. But I also know that what happened between us started before either of us understood the professional implications." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm asking you to think about building something together that goes beyond quarterly reports and 5-year plans." Caroline stared at the box, emotions swirling. 3 months ago, she'd been unemployed and questioning her worth. Now she had work that mattered, respect she'd earned, and a man who valued both her professional competence and her personal strength. "Can I see it?" she asked softly. The ring was perfect, simple, elegant, a classic solitaire that caught the light like captured starfire. But more than the jewelry, it represented trust, partnership, the possibility of choosing each other every day. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "So is that a yes?" Caroline looked up at him, at the face she'd first seen exhausted and grateful in stormy darkness, now patient and hopeful in autumn sunlight. "Ask me properly." Ethan smiled and dropped to one knee in the hay-scented barn where they'd first complicated each other's lives. "Caroline Foster, will you marry me and spend the rest of your life improving my operational efficiency?" She laughed, tears starting. "That's the nerdiest proposal I've ever heard. Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." The kiss that followed tasted like forever, like storms survived and harvests yet to come around them. The farm hummed with productive energy, cattle lowing in distant pastures, equipment running smoothly, systems working in harmony. As they broke apart, Caroline caught movement in the doorway. Miguel stood there with a shy smile, holding a bouquet of roses from his carefully tended beds. "For la señorita," he said formally, presenting the flowers with the dignity of someone offering a blessing. "From the garden that watches over everything. Gracias." "Miguel, they're perfect." As the elderly groundskeeper walked away, Ethan slipped the ring onto Caroline's finger. "So, what do you think? Ready to take on the agricultural world together?" Caroline looked down at the ring, then out at the farm that had become home, then into the eyes of the man who'd first appeared in her life as someone needing rescue, and had become someone worth building dreams with. "I think we're going to revolutionize everything," she said. And as the Texas sun set over their fields, painting everything gold and possible, Caroline knew that sometimes the best destinations were the ones you never planned to reach, found instead by stopping to help a stranger in the rain and discovering that kindness could transform not just their life, but your own. The Harvest Festival had been Samuel's idea, but the entire Hale Farms community had embraced it with enthusiasm that surprised everyone. What started as a simple celebration of the season's successful crop had evolved into something approaching a county fair, complete with bluegrass music, barbecue smoke perfuming the autumn air, and children running between hay bales while their parents sampled Becca's famous peach cobbler. Caroline stood on the main house's wide porch, watching the festivities spread across the pasture that had been transformed into a celebration space. String lights twinkled between oak trees, couples danced on a temporary platform, and the aroma of Luis's slow-smoked brisket competed with the sweet scent of caramel apples. "Penny for your thoughts," Ethan said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of mulled cider. "Just thinking about how much has changed." Caroline accepted the warm cup gratefully. 6 months ago, I was unemployed and wondering if I'd ever find where I belonged. Now you're revolutionizing Texas agriculture and planning a wedding." They'd announced their engagement 3 weeks ago, and the reaction from the farm community had been overwhelmingly positive. Becca had immediately appointed herself wedding coordinator. Miguel was planning elaborate garden displays for the ceremony, and Luis had already started smoking meats for what was sure to be the most well-fed wedding reception in county history. "Caroline," a voice called from the crowd below. "Come settle an argument." They descended the porch steps to find a group gathered around Samuel, who was demonstrating the new automated irrigation system to visitors from neighboring farms. The interest had been so intense that Caroline found herself giving impromptu seminars on sustainable technology integration. "Tell them about the water savings," Samuel urged as Caroline approached. 37% reduction in water usage while increasing crop yields by 12%, she recited, then smiled at the impressed faces surrounding her. "But the real success is how we integrated traditional farming wisdom with modern technology. Miguel here has taught our computers to see what experienced farmers have always known." The elderly groundskeeper beamed with pride as Caroline translated his expertise into terms that made sense to both traditional farmers and technology enthusiasts. Watching Miguel gain recognition for decades of accumulated wisdom was one of Caroline's greatest satisfactions. As the crowd dispersed to sample more festival offerings, Ethan pulled Caroline aside. "There's something I want to show you." He led her away from the main celebration, toward the equipment barn where their relationship had weathered its first crisis and bloomed into something stronger. But instead of going inside, he guided her around to the back, where a surprise waited. "Oh my God," Caroline breathed. A small plot of land had been transformed into a garden, not Miguel's practical vegetable rows, but an ornamental space with curved pathways, flowering shrubs, and a gazebo that looked like something from a fairy tale. At the center stood a wooden sign, "Caroline's Garden, where innovation takes root." "It's beautiful," she whispered, then turned to him with suspicion. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the day you agreed to marry me. I wanted you to have a place that was completely yours, where you could think and plan and dream." Ethan's voice carried the shy uncertainty of someone offering their heart. "Do you like it?" Instead of answering immediately, Caroline walked the pathways, touching plants she recognized as her favorites from conversations they'd had about gardening: rosemary for remembrance, lavender for devotion, jasmine for grace under pressure. Every choice reflected intimate knowledge of her preferences and dreams. "It's perfect," she said finally, "but you know what would make it even better." "What?" "A bench where we can sit and watch everything grow," as they walked back toward the festival. The sound of laughter and music growing stronger with each step, Caroline felt a completeness she'd never expected to find. The professional success was satisfying, but it was the personal connections that made everything meaningful. The found family of farm workers who'd fought for justice, the community that had embraced her innovations, and the man beside her who'd seen her potential even when she'd doubted it herself. "Caroline, Ethan," Becca's voice carried across the crowd. "You need to see this." They followed her to where a small stage had been set up for announcements. Samuel stood at the microphone, looking nervous but determined. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and neighbors," he began, his voice carrying clearly over the crowd. 6 months ago, this farm was struggling. We had good people and good land, but we weren't working as efficiently as we could. Then Caroline Foster arrived, and everything changed. Applause rippled through the gathered crowd. Caroline felt heat rise in her cheeks. But Caroline didn't just improve our operations, Samuel continued. She reminded us that innovation works best when it honors tradition, that technology serves people, not the other way around, that treating each other with respect and dignity isn't just morally right, it's good business. More applause. Warmer now. Caroline spotted Miguel in the crowd, nodding approvingly. So tonight, we're not just celebrating a successful harvest. We're celebrating the kind of leadership that brings out the best in everyone around them. Samuel raised his cup of cider. To Caroline Foster, who stopped to help a stranger in the rain and ended up helping all of us find our way. The crowd erupted in genuine celebration. Caroline found herself surrounded by people offering congratulations, sharing stories of how the farm improvements had affected their work and lives, expressing gratitude that someone had finally valued their experience and expertise. As the formal presentations wound down and the music started up again, Ethan found Caroline sitting on a hay bale, watching couples dance under the string lights. "No regrets?" he asked, settling beside her. "About what? Leaving your corporate career for agricultural innovation? Trading Denver for rural Texas? Agreeing to marry your boss?" Caroline considered the question seriously, looking out at the celebration that felt like a harvest of much more than crops. Luis was teaching his young niece to two-step. Becca was laughing with neighbors who'd become friends. Miguel was carefully arranging flowers at each table, his artistry finally recognized and celebrated. "You want to know my only regret," she said finally. "That it took a thunderstorm to bring us together. I wish I'd found this place sooner." Ethan stood and extended his hand. "Dance with me." As they moved on to the makeshift dance floor, Caroline felt the completeness of a story that had begun with a simple act of kindness and grown into something larger than she'd ever imagined possible. Around them, the Texas night was filled with music and laughter, the scent of wood smoke and growing things, the warmth of community built on mutual respect and shared purpose. "You know," she murmured against Ethan's shoulder as they swayed to a ballad about coming home, "that storm turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though you got soaked, even though I had no idea what I was getting into. Do you know now?" Caroline looked into his face, the face she'd first seen exhausted and grateful in stormy darkness, now confident and loving in celebration light, and smiled. "I know we're building something real together. I know that kindness creates more opportunities than ambition ever could. And I know that sometimes the best adventures start with the simplest choice to help someone who needs it." As the music swelled around them, and the Texas stars wheeled overhead, Caroline understood that she'd found exactly what she'd been searching for without knowing it: work that mattered, love that supported her strength rather than diminishing it, and a place where innovation and tradition could flourish together. That thunderstorm had seemed like an ending, the conclusion of a long, difficult day, but it had been a beginning, the first chapter of a story about second chances, earned trust, and the extraordinary things that happen when good people choose to see the best in each other. What moment in this story resonated most with your own experiences of taking chances on new opportunities? Have you ever had an act of simple kindness lead to unexpected changes in your life? Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with a stranger walking through the rain,